I've been coming to Tällberg on and off for 20 years now. I've probably been here, I actually need to count, 6, 7, 8 times, something like that. I don't come every year, because that might get boring, but I come every couple years. And I come for essentially 4 reasons. One, most importantly, for the people. Not just the people I've known over the years, but there's been some absolutely terrific connections made and nurtured over many years, but new people. Partly because the Tällberg community is, for better or for worse, better and worse, I guess, incredibly diverse. So it combines very consciously science and business and government and NGOs and technologists. And there's not very many places where you can get that kind of grocery store approach to meeting new people. So people. Secondly, ideas. We all live in a world of ideas. We all spend an awful lot of time reading, thinking, talking. But this place allows you, in a semi-focused way, to latch on to both to latch on to new ideas and to examine old ideas, and occasionally let the two collide, and there's even some learning out of that. Thirdly, I won't say it's for the weather, but I will say it's for Tällberg. I don't know this place that well. I've only been here, 10 times maybe total, but I love it. It is, if all of Europe was like this, Europe would be a better place. Fourth, part of the approach of Tällberg, and it's really a learning approach, is the integration of thinking and culture, of art and music and poetry and people and talking. And partly it recognizes that we have both a right brain and a left brain, and you learn with both, not with one. And again, Aspen does that. Tällberg does it. I think actually Tällberg does it better than Aspen, but that's a different point. And I don't know anybody else that does it even remotely as well. And I've got to say there's probably a fifth point, and this is a word from our sponsor, I suppose. I have enormous respect and affection for Boo Ekman. I've known Boo since the late 80s, which is now getting to be a long time. He is a force of nature. Sometimes that's a good force, sometimes it's a bad force, sometimes it's a hurricane, sometimes it's an avalanche, but it's a force of nature. And I have always found that he doesn't teach me very much anymore, I must say, but he forces me to learn. And I think that's a far more valuable thing. And it's part of the reason why I do have such deep affection for Boo, and hence for Tällberg. No, I don't think anybody trusts each other, and I'm not really sure, although I thought it was a useful session, I thought it was an enjoyable session. I enjoyed leading it and trying to get people to talk to each other, which is one of the things I do for a living. I'm not sure we came away either more trusting or more knowledgeable, in part because I don't think we're really grappling with the issues. The most important thing that came out of it, in fact, was the recognition that we probably have the wrong people in leadership, the wrong people in politics, the wrong people in business leadership. Part of the reason we're making all these mistakes, part of the reason we're not trusting these institutions, I think, is the people aren't there. And so the question is, how do you get somebody to decide to become a politician today? In many countries, you'd have to have your head examined. In my own country, you'd have to have your head examined, or be very wealthy, or both. So part of my pessimism about the future is a pessimism about not what leaders know or don't know, or have access to information, don't have access to information. It's about who seems to want to become a government leader, a political leader. And that we touched on. It did bubble up. It's one of those perfect examples of the Tällberg conversation, because it wasn't on the agenda. I hadn't thought of it before the meeting. I didn't consciously raise it, but it sort of bubbled up out of the floor. I think Anders Wijkman raised it first, and I think it was a contribution because it's one of those, you can't you can't just wave a wand and say, have better governance, have better governments. It is about people, and if you've got the wrong people, you're going to get the wrong governments. So I don't know what to do with that, and it isn't leadership training, which I don't believe in. It's about recruiting and valuing more leaders in a way, valuing in the sense of creating it as something people want to do, creating incentives for people actually to go into those tracks. I don't know how to do it. I'm clueless, but I know it's important. Should we talk about dogs?
Yeah, sure. Let's talk about dogs. Yeah. Say a little bit about Gloria's stuff.
One of the my wife, 16 years ago now, had an idea. She thought that she could raise dogs in prisons to become service dogs. At the time, the service dog was going to be dogs for the blind because there's a shortage of dogs for the blind in the United States. And she talked about, actually, she had the idea about 18 years ago, and she talked about it nonstop for 2 years. And finally one day, we were at the farm, and we're out in a field, and she's talking and talking and talking. And I said to Gloria, stop. Either shut up or do it. Alan, in his stupidity, thought shut up was going to win. Literally, this was on a Sunday. On Monday, she went into her office. She worked for Mayor Giuliani at the time in New York, and quit. Came home that day and said, I quit. And I'm going to start this organization. It didn't have a name at the time, which I thought was insane. Nonprofits should do one thing. This was going to do things in a prison, which meant changing the prison community. It was going to help blind people. That was at least one too many, and there were sort of a few other things. And there was going to work with dogs, and I thought it was nuts. 16 years later, they have so far raised something in the order of 900 dogs. Those dogs, over the years, she started with working with the blind. And after 9/11, she said, what can I do? And she thought for about a week, and she said, I can do dogs. What do we know about dogs? Dogs are amazingly empathetic. They're amazingly smart, and they're trainable. So she said, first, we have a shortage of explosives. In fact, during 9/11 in New York, and the site was, of course, cordoned off. You can get down there. And I was out of the country. I couldn't get into the country. Gloria would take our dogs, and she would walk as close as she could get to the scene of the World Trade Center and have the dogs there as people came out, as the workers came out. And you could just, she told me these stories of policemen, these great big burly guys, great big firemen, coming down and literally breaking down. They'd see a dog, they'd come over, they'd hug a dog, they would just sit there talking to the dog because it was that humanity that a dog brings out in us. So she already knew she was on the right track because it had worked for the blind, but that's where she sort of got the idea. What can I do? I can do dogs. And who can I do them for? Well, you can do them first because we had a shortage of explosive detection dogs, and you could train them to do that. But then, as our wars rolled on, she realized what we were creating was an unusual number of men and women with post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury, and said, aha, this is really our niche, because the combination of intelligence and empathy for dogs, that dogs have, suggested to her that, wow, she could train dogs. And she didn't come up uniquely with that idea, but she uniquely came up with a very professional approach to this. So, for example, she's working with a soldier now. This poor guy, 4 years ago, was on a Humvee in Iraq. Humvee hits an IED, and in those models of the Humvee, for reasons that only an auto designer would know, they put the gas tank next to the turret. So this guy was the turret gunner. He's up on top, hits the ID, gas tank blows, he's engulfed in flames. He somehow manages to get out, jumps off, breaks his leg, extremely badly in fact, is rolling down a hill, setting the ground on fire. He's literally that engulfed in flames. Happens to hit the only break in the abutment and goes into a canal, which saves his life. Somehow he doesn't drown. They got him out, but it put out the flames. Fast forward to today. He lost one leg and has a prosthesis, I think, on his left leg. Lost both ears, his nose, his face was badly burned to the point that it can't be reconstructed. And he has, I think, out of 10 original fingers, I think he's got 3. And again, the stuff was so severely done, and the skin was so burned that they can't build prostheses because there's nothing to hook it onto. And she met this guy recently. He's going to get one of their service dogs. And she told me the other day, the remarkable thing about this guy is he is the most optimistic, upbeat person she's met in her life. And he's made his mission in life to explain to people, especially kids, that if he can cope with his problems, and you think your problems are bad. Now, he needs a dog for 2 kinds of reasons. One, he is by definition fundamentally lonely, and if anybody deserves to have post-traumatic stress, somebody like this does. So dog will help this fellow cope with life. But 2, he has physical limitations. So since he has no fingers, it's really tough to put your jacket on. So the very first day of training, they're in the prison, and the prisoners train the dogs, but now she's decided to have the prisoners also train the recipients of the dogs for the 2 weeks of intense mating, if you will. The dog meets the woman he's going to live with, and the prisoner helps in that. So this guy's saying, you know, I have this physical problem. I have a really tough time dressing in the morning. And they looked around at each other, the prisoners, and said, we can solve this. So they had the dog hop up on a table, and I have pictures of this, where the dog, and they said, they taught the dog to hold the sleeve open. Dogs hold things, and these dogs are all taught to carry things around. So the dog's taught to hold the sleeve, and we have these images of real-time learning. Dog's learning how to hold the sleeve. He's learning how to put his arm in a thing. By the end of that, and it's all done by an inmate, somebody who's locked up, in this particular case, for life, for murder. But in this, so it's a perfect example of how Puppies Behind Bars works, which is the name of the organization. The inmate has a purpose in life. The person who was so badly maimed in a war has a better life as a result of it. And the prison community changes from a place of punishment to a place of creativity, of innovation. So I'm an enormous fan. My major contribution, besides Shut Up or Do It, was the name. And I'm extremely proud of the name, Puppies Behind Bars. I was very drunk when we came up with that, I must confess. But it stuck over all these years, and I think it's an absolutely perfect name for this organization.
You need in a person.
I have never seen the connection that I see between inmates and soldiers. And I think it's because they share a lot of the same issues. They are both in their own prisons.
It just makes you feel alive because you're finally doing something with your time. You're not just punching in, punching out, or sweeping the floor. You're doing something that's like, beyond like people's imagination.
This is something that they can give back to society. Even though some people may still have negative opinions about them, this is their way to redemption.